everyone, it's James here. Welcome to another video. Thank you for tuning in. Today's topic is going to be Elvis Costello as the man, and this video is going to be a bit different from the usual, as I'm going to have a special guest. In fact, this is going to be a collaboration video, but we're doing it by distance, and my collaborator is the VC's very own Mr. John Pickles. So let's just cut to him now and he can say hello.
Hey VC, Elvis Costello, an amazing artist, came onto the scene in 1977, has had so many albums, so many hits, just a really great artist. I saw him around 1978 after his second album at Dingwalls in London, and it was just amazing. Dingwalls is a very long shed-like venue with a bar all down one side, and he was just at the end on a slightly 4-inch raised platform so you could get really close to it. It was steamy and hot. It was so exciting.
Elvis Costello was one of the first people that I really remember seeing on Top of the Pops, and it always sticks in my mind. I think the first time I ever saw him was the video for Oliver's Army, and I was very taken with this shot of Elvis sort of running into the sea with his electric guitar, and it was something that I thought would be quite good fun to try. Not that I had an electric guitar, but you know, I seem to remember my parents telling me that it probably wouldn't be a very good idea to do this. So that really sticks in my mind. And I mean, I absolutely loved Oliver's Army. I mean, you know, I loved ABBA anyway, and that song has a real sort of ABBA feel to it with those big cascading piano chords. I also remember seeing really clearly in my mind's eye, I can see it, seeing the video or seeing the Top of the Pops appearance that Elvis and the Attractions did for the song Accidents Will Happen. And what I remember about this is my mum watching it with me and saying that she thought he looked like a cretin, which I thought was quite funny. So yeah, Elvis Costello, he was part of the musical backdrop, or he was part of the musical world that I was growing up into and with. But oddly enough, I never bought any of his records. I mean, I was buying all sorts of stuff by 78, 79, but for some reason I just never cottoned on to him as, you know, somebody whose records I would buy. The first time I actually bought a Costello record was when I think I was about 17 when I bought this. I actually bought it when it came out, and that was the Spike album. And the reason I bought this album was because it has Paul McCartney on it. It has some tracks on here that Elvis and Paul wrote together, they being Veronica, which was a hit single, and also the song Pads, Paws and Claws. So this is the first time I bought an Elvis album. I think this came out in 1989, which was the year I went to university. I went to university in October of '89, and I bought this record not long before going. In the 90s, I basically found a lot of Costello albums in the wild, you know, in places such as Oxfam or, you know, various charity shops, Goodwill. This is when, you know, records were quite affordable. So I'm going to start to show you what I have now, but before I do, I don't have the first two Costello records on vinyl. Over to you, John.
Yes. First 3 albums were just amazing. The first of which is My Aim Is True, which is this one. This is actually the reissue on Columbia. It's just a superb album. I know every single track on here. I could probably sing every single one of them. But some really good singles off this. Allison, the first single, really quiet. You know, this came out in '77. Nick Lowe produced, and you know, Allison was a real sort of quiet Fender Strat driven, or Fender Jazzmaster actually, driven song. Really clear. Bit of an end of party song, you know, when you're smooching. And at the time, it was just quite different because punk had really kicked off. It was sort of in between it. But the rest of the album is quite upbeat. Red Shoes, The Angels Want to Wear My Red Shoes, fantastic track, also a single. And of course, Watching the Detectives, a superb sort of reggae vibe single that was just amazing. I think this got to number 14 in the charts, which was amazing at the time. It was on Rough Trade. Really great album. How do you follow that first album? You know, the awkward second album, and he goes and turns up with this year's model, an absolute wonderful album with Pump It Up on, which was a superb single, and Radio, and the sublime I Don't Want to Go to Chelsea, really long reggae sort of beat to that one. 1978, the whole album's only 35 minutes long, but God, it's a real stunner. It's just got some great music on. Of course, the Attractions with Elvis on this one, and a great inner sleeve. I love this one. Really good artwork. That could almost be on a Kraftwerk album, that one. And really nice vanity label on that one, sort of like a Beat Radar Records. So interesting. So great follow-up. He followed it with an amazing album, and James is going to tell you about that one.
Okay, thank you, John. So we now move on to album number 3, which is Armed Forces. I do actually like the inside. I'll show you it. This I love this. Apparently, they didn't seek permission to have their photograph taken on the premises of this person's house. This is on the Wirral in the north of England, or sort of just above Wales, and they just had the photo taken in the driveway of this person's house, and then there was some legal dispute later because it got put on the album cover, and the people who owned the house had never given their permission. I'd love to know who they were. Anyway, so this record comes from the period when I first clued into Elvis. It's the album that contains Accidents Will Happen. It's also got Oliver's Army on it. You know, really, really concise pop songwriting with great hooks, great melodies. Now, Elvis's voice, I think, is a kind of, it's an acquired taste. It's a bit like Bob Dylan. It's not necessarily a voice which is going to seduce you. You sort of either like it or you don't. It has a kind of almost a sort of sour, vinegary quality to it. And I sometimes find that as he's gone through his career, he hasn't always been that consistent with the pop hooks and the kind of the really insistent tunefulness which actually comes through on this record. I mean, he had a huge range of influences. Elvis Costello, I mean, all the way from Frank Sinatra, all the way through the punk years, and jazz standards, all kinds of things, all kind of mixed up. But the Beatles certainly, feature big in his world. So this album contains some great words from Goon Squad. Some grow up just like their dads, and some grow up too tall. Some go drinking with the lads, and some don't grow up at all. And musically, okay, he was always a master at being able to lift things from other songs. On this record, you have Party Girl, which ends with a segment which sounds like the song contains a musical passage which sounds like the end of You Never Gave Me Your Money by the Beatles. It has that kind of slow descending arpeggiated guitar in it. You've got Oliver's Army, which lifts the piano from Dancing Queen. Two Little Hitlers, I recognise a kind of guitar steel there from Rebel Rebel by David Bowie. So it kind of touches all these different little signposts, and it just becomes almost a kind of postmodern rock record, or a pop record. So, yeah, Armed Forces, one of the great alternative pop albums of the late 1970s, Elvis's third album. We now move on to Get Happy from 1980, which is again produced by Nick Lowe. This album was his attempt to do stuff which was in a more rhythm and blues kind of mode. He was really influenced by Motown and Stax. He recorded, there were 20 songs on this record, 10 per side. And there was a rumour, or there was some unpleasantness in a kind of barroom brawl out on tour in America, where Elvis was accused of having uttered kind of racist remarks. I don't know what happened. He was drunk, but there was a rumour that he sort of went away and recorded this album to prove that he wasn't a racist, because this album owes a lot to R&B and Motown and Stax and black styles. And again, a bit like Armed Forces, it contains a lot of really good focused songwriting with great hooks. These songs that jump out at me, you've got the song Opportunity, which sounds almost like a kind of Willie Mitchell, Al Green number. It has that very kind of vibey, warm quality that you get on the High Records, Willie Mitchell's label. Secondary Modern sounds like a slowed down Booker T and the MGs, and also the song Temptation. Also, it sounds like the Booker T song Time Is Tight. It's that dun 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 dun. I haven't mentioned yet, the Attractions. It can't be understated what a great band they were. I mean, Pete Thomas was one of the great British drummers. He was heavy, he had groove, he had feel. He had Steve Naive, who was a young guy. He was just a music student, and he was called Steve Naive because he was very naive. He didn't know. He'd come from quite a protected musical college kind of education, and he didn't really know the score. But wonderful pianist and a wonderful musician who was able to embellish Elvis's songs. Well, not just embellish, but he was able to inhabit Elvis's songs and just restructure them with these kind of grand pianistic ideas, and he was great at lifting ideas, such as the ABBA keyboard thing. But the songs that the Attractions recorded with Elvis are full of all sorts of musical detail and wonderful touches. And the bass player, Bruce Thomas, Bruce Thomas together with Pete Thomas, what a rhythm section that is. The Attractions were like a great American barroom band, and they just do such a great job on this record. The song Five Gears in Reverse just has the most pounding groove to it. Human Touch, they just effortlessly slip into ska mode. Beaten to the Punch just sounds like early Beatles. Really great album. And there's some really good lyrics on this one as well. What jumps out at me, the song High Fidelity, where he compares his girlfriend leaving him to her changing channels on the TV, which is just an absolute stroke of genius. And I love the song Temptation, where he sort of makes a passing reference, a kind of self-referential thing, where he mentions this guy, who's this kid with his mumbo-jumbo living in air-conditioned limo, which I think is a kind of passing reference to himself, writing mumbo-jumbo. He sort of knew that his lyrics were very opaque and difficult to interpret. And just that kind of classic Costello wordplay. Riot act, don't put your heart out on your sleeve when your remarks are off the cuff. So yeah, fantastic album from 1980, that is Get Happy. Okay, so 1981 we have the album Trust, which I don't think was that well received at the time, but I think in retrospect lots of people now say this is one of his best albums. Again, it was produced by Nick Lowe. There's a picture of the guys on the back. This album contains that duet with Glenn Tilbrook from A Whisper to a Scream, which is a definite high point, I think. New Lace Sleeves has a kind of almost a prefab Sprout kind of sophistication to it. I think that was probably again because of the way that Steve Naive could just elaborate on Elvis's chord sequences and just make them very elegant. And my favourite line from this album is the song White Knuckles. He needs her like the axe needs the turkey.
Let's move forward to 1981. Elvis was into Gram Parsons and bought out an album which had a warning sticker on it because it was so different from what he was used to doing, or what we would expect as fans for him to be doing. And it says, warning, this album contains country and western music and may produce radical reaction in narrow-minded people. On F-Beat Records, which he sort of did, and there it is, Almost Blue. Actually, one of my favourite Costello and the Attractions albums. It's really good. Of course, they recorded this in Nashville with some of the local sort of Nashvilleian session musicians on here. So John McPhee on lead guitar and pedal steel. The Nashville edition doing backing vocals, and produced by Billy Sherrill. So just a fantastic album. And of course, the big single off this was Good Year for the Roses. And what a great track. These are all covers, by the way, which is another reason a lot of people didn't like it. And, it got some really bad press when it came out, but that sometimes makes me really want to go for an album. I often find that the bad press pulls me in, as you'll see from the last one that I'm going to talk through today. But fabulous album. Okay,
so next we have the album Imperial Bedroom. Now this one marked a departure. It was produced by Geoff Emerick, who'd been the engineer on some of the Beatles' greatest work. And my goodness, Geoff Emerick goes to town on this. It's still the Attractions, but It's an album which it's just got really big, elaborate arrangements on it. It's almost baroque, you know. It's kind of orchestral. There's elements of psych on there, and you know, I mean, Geoff Emerick was a master at cutting tapes together and really sculpting the sound so it becomes less just a kind of live band in the studio, and it turns it kind of more into a big, huge production number. The track "Man Out of Time" actually is the true highlight of this album, which it's actually 2 tracks cut together. It starts with an excerpt from another song which they were recording, which has this really kind of psych, pounding kind of groove to it, and this kind of screaming from Elvis, and then it just cuts into a completely different song, and that was Geoff Emerick with his tape scissors, you know, just literally snipping the tape, and you know, really, really good stuff. It's quite kind of epic. It's like a Dylan song. I think this is Elvis really making a case for himself. I think he's deliberately trying to make something which is going to stand the test of time. It's going to be like a towering monument to his own talent. You've got ornate chamber pop, and in every home. You have Little Fool, which has backward tape loops. It has harpsichords, and the song Town Crier. It almost sounds like a slice of deep Philly soul. It really does have that kind of glistening orchestral production that is just it's really magnificent sounding. Some really nice lyrics. Beyond Belief contains the couplet, "I'm just the oily slick on the wind-up world of the nervous tick." You know, his lyrics could be very visual and paint pictures in your mind, even if you're not entirely sure what he's actually singing about.
So, 1983, moving on. The 8th album by Elvis Costello and the Attractions, Punch the Clock. Again on F-Beat Records. Love that picture of the band on the back. Every Day I Wrote the Book, which is I just love that. I Write the Book, sorry. I just love that single. But it's also got the sublime shipbuilding on here, written about the Falklands War. It's the end of side 1, and Robert Wyatt did the most beautiful version of this. And I think that version actually was a hit for Robert Wyatt, but this version is absolutely amazing. The Invisible Man, Charm School, really good, punchy album again, some great tracks, and you could see where he was heading at the time. Okay, so on to Elvis's least favourite album, 9th album by the band, released in 1984, Goodbye Cruel World. Once again, got massively bad press. Even Elvis didn't like it. He said the songs were great, but poor execution of those songs, which is a real shame, because I actually like it. Once again, because he said that at the time, and I think I was reading that in NME, the New Musical Express, and I thought, I'm going to get that because it sounds like it's interesting, to say the least. And it started off as a bit of a folky vibe when they first recorded it, and then he was unhappy, and he announced his retirement. The band were going to split up as soon as this was released. For Elvis, and certainly the Attractions, it was curtains. Maybe that's why it's called Goodbye Cruel World. But I actually love it. I think in hindsight now, it's like a lot of these albums that were not liked at the time. They come back at you, and you think, I'm really going to try and listen to that. You know, listen to it as if I'm listening to it for the first time, and revisit the album. And that's what I've done with this one. The Only Flame in Town, I really like that song. I can understand why that could be folky. Love Field I Love and I Want to Be Loved, that was a single. And he often still plays that live. So, you know, he liked the songs, he just didn't like the delivery on this. Maybe this is one for him to reissue in the way that he felt it should have gone. But I'm not sure that's the thing that Elvis would do. But love that album. So pleased to have found a really clean copy of that.
Okay, so from 1986, we have the album King of America, which was a pretty major departure for Elvis. It was definitely his attempt to do something kind of, you know, drenched in Americana. It's produced by T-Bone Burnett. It contains, a vast assembly of different musicians. Mitchell Froome, you have Jim Keltner, the great session drummer, James Burton, the great rockabilly guitarist. It's a very dense album lyrically. It contains some very kind of show-stopping ballads. Brilliant Mistake, the opening track, is one of my favourite Elvis songs. It has a real sort of melancholy feel to it. You know, some absolutely lovely chord changes. The album featured members of the TCB band, who had been Elvis Presley's band, and they'd also had credits playing with Graham Parsons and Emmylou Harris. So he was really reaching back into that kind of tangled web of Americana and just the kind of legend of American music, and recasting himself. And I think at this point he was possibly going through some marital difficulties, or maybe that had already happened, and there'd been a couple of adulterous affairs. And you know, Elvis's words and lyrics were always quite dark and bitter and angry, and there's a kind of a tone of self-reproach starts to creep in, I think, with this record, which becomes, you know, increasingly dark. Is King of America from 1986, and now we're going to go back to John for the follow-up, also from the same year.
1986, every song written by Declan McManus, the 11th studio album, reunited with Nick Lowe and the Attractions, everything going for it. I rushed out to buy it, and when I first heard it, I thought, what the is this? It was so different. It was heavy, moody, dark. Blood and Chocolate, the actual title track, was just in your face and uncomplicated as well, absolutely in your face. There he is, Napoleon Dynamite here. And I just thought, I'm not sure about this. And so I started to play it a lot, all the time. And just suddenly it kicked in, and I just thought, this is the best Costello album ever. Honey, Are You Straight or Are You Blind? Blue Chair, Battered Old Bird, which is absolutely... the production on it is really minimalist. It's really hard. It's really in your face. It sounds like Elvis is in the room, and he's really shouting it out. It's just fantastic. Crimes of Paris, beautiful. It's got Kate O'Riordan on that one, and it's just a beautiful track. It's a grower, and the grower albums, those ones that aren't instantly up there for you, are the ones that stick. This is actually in the book 1001 Albums You Need to Hear Before You Die. The two singles from here are I Want You, which I'll talk about in a minute, and I Hope You're Happy Now. I Hope You're Happy Now was really a return to the Elvis and the Attractions of old, but I Want You is a track that is really dark, reminiscent of, it is I Want You by the Beatles from Abbey Road, but it is a completely different song. But the whole song structure and the way it sort of builds up, I think it is what made me think of I Want You from the Beatles. Of interest, that Napoleon Dynamite painting on the front, very weird, is called Napoleon Dynamite. That's why he probably called himself Napoleon Dynamite, painted by Eamon Singer. This was actually produced by Nick Lowe and Colin Fairley together. Absolutely amazing. Recorded at Olympic in London. I love it so much. I bought another copy, and whenever I see it in the wild, which you don't often, I try and pick one up. And the other day, talking about pickups, and finally for me, I found a 12-inch copy of this. I Want You. What did it cost me? £1. I Want You on one side, and I Hope You're Happy Now on the other.
Okay, thank you, John, very much. So we're going to finish up now. I'll quickly show you my copy of Blood and Chocolate. Just wanted to add something to what John said. This record apparently was recorded all in one room, live, by the Attractions, which might explain why it has that kind of big, powerful, tremendous sound. So there we go, Blood and Chocolate. And then we bring things full circle with the album Spike, and this is a fun album. It's probably not as dark and tangled and embittered as some of his earlier works, although it does contain the notable song Tramp the Dirt Down, which was a very controversial song. it was about Margaret Thatcher really, and how he would, how he would gladly pat the dirt down on her grave. So a very political song, a very angry song. And a huge cast of musicians on this record again. I mean, you have all sorts of people. You've got the guitarist Mark Rebo, who I think he was Tom Waits' guitarist. And this album actually is quite Tom Waitsian. I think there was a fair bit of crossover between Elvis and Tom Waits over the years. You know, they met each other a couple of times, and I think they were fans of each other. And there's a certain surreal quality to their work, which I think you could sort of draw a parallel between Elvis and Tom. Alan Toussaint is on here, the great legendary New Orleans kind of R&B producer and musician and songwriter, who Elvis would later go on to record an album with. You've got Benmont Tench, the keyboard player from Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers. You've got all sorts of people. You know, Paul McCartney plays bass on a couple of tracks. Roger McGuinn from the Byrds plays his Rickenbacker 12-string guitar on the song This Town. So just a nice, good, fun album, apart from the song about Thatcher. And after this, Elvis went a bit strange. He grew a beard and long hair and moved into the 90s, which was a decade which would see him achieving greater heights of critical success, but drifting further and further away from that pop new wave thing which had made him famous. So that is another story. Okay, so I hope you enjoyed the video. I hope it was a bit of a different take on it. Thank you to John Pickles for helping me do it and showing the records that I didn't have. And please leave some comments below. I'd love to hear what you think of Elvis and what we've had to say. So in the meantime, I shall love you and leave you, and I'll see you in the next video. Take care, folks. Bye-bye.
Catch you all later.